"Sir, I want to sell something." The voice did not shake, did not beg, did not hesitate. It carried the quiet weight of a child who had already learned what it meant to have no other choice. "What is it?" Vincent Rossi asked, without looking up. His tone, calm, controlled the kind of voice that had settled disputes and commanded men without ever needing to rise. "It belongs to my mother," she said. "She's sick. We need money." The watch touched the counter, and in that exact second the world inside him stopped. 7 years before a little girl walked into his antique shop holding his own pocket watch, Vincent Rossi still believed that love, if chosen hard enough, could survive anything built to destroy it. He was 32, then the heir to a construction empire that owned the skyline of Chicago, and controlled the rest in ways no one ever said out loud. Wealth did not follow him. It preceded him, reshaped rooms around him, erased resistance before it formed. His future had already been decided, polished into something flawless and suffocating, a life so perfect it became a prison before he even realized he was inside it. Then he met Elena Ramirez. She was not dramatic, not breathtaking, not the kind of woman men like him were supposed to notice, and that was exactly why he never forgot her. She did not react to his name, did not smile too wide, did not lower her eyes in fear or lift them in ambition. She simply answered him and returned to her work as if he were no one special. "You work here?" he asked. "Yes." "You are not joining the event?" "I am still working." "At this hour?" She looked at the files, then back at him and said, "Children do not schedule their pain around fundraising events." That line stayed. He came back 3 days later, then again the next week, then again until one night there was no excuse left and he stood there with nothing but the truth. "I wanted to see you." She should have refused him. She knew exactly what kind of story this was. A powerful man, a poor woman curiosity that always ended in damage. But Vincent was careful, and that was what made him dangerous. He listened, he remembered, he showed up. He never made her feel small, and slowly she let him in. Their love did not grow in luxury. It grew in cheap diners, in cold air, in quiet corners where no one cared who they were. And for the first time in his life, Vincent felt something real enough to threaten everything that had been built around him. Then she told him the truth. "I'm pregnant." Silence filled the space between them, 1 second, 2, the kind of silence that decides futures. Then he moved fast, too fast, crossing the distance and holding her like letting go would erase her. "I heard you," he said. "You're not shocked?" she asked. "I am," he answered, looking at her like the world had just shifted under his feet. "I'm also terrified." He dropped to his knees, his forehead against her stomach, his hands shaking in a way no one had ever seen. "I won't let them erase you," he said. "I won't let them erase this child, I promise." That night he gave her the watch. She laughed softly through tears. Who gives a woman a pocket watch? And he answered, a man who wants to mark the exact second his life became his own. He closed her fingers around it and said, "No matter what happens, this time is ours." But there was something he did not understand. Some families do not fight love, they erase it. The changes came quietly at first, schedules shifting, pressure appearing in places that could not be traced, doors closing without explanation. Then she was gone. An accident, a call, a coffin he was told not to open. And Vincent believed it. He buried her without seeing her face, buried the woman he loved and the child he never got to meet in the same moment, and something inside him never recovered. 7 years passed, not healing, just survival. Until today. A little girl, 7 years old, standing in front of him with the one object he knew could not exist here. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice no longer steady. "It's my mom's." "What's her name?" She hesitated, cautious, the way children learn to be when the world has not been kind, then said Elena. The room disappeared, not physically but completely inside him, 7 years collapsing into a single breath. "You don't have to sell this today," he said. "I do," she answered, the same quiet strength, the same tone he had heard before in another life. "What if I help your mother first and we decide about the watch later?" he said. And for the first time in years his voice cracked. She studied him carefully, like trust was something that cost too much to give away. Then she handed him a clinic card, and in that moment Vincent understood something that felt bigger than shock, bigger than grief, something that tore straight through everything he thought he knew. Some things do not die. They are taken, buried, erased, and sometimes they come back in the hands of a child who has no idea she is carrying the truth. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect on the quiet power of kindness, especially when no one else chooses to show it. Share your thoughts in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. Which city and country are you in, and what time is it there right now? It's always amazing to see how stories like this connect people from all over the world. Is it United States, London, maybe Canada, Jamaica, South Africa, or anywhere we want to know? and tell us what you learned at the end of this video. If moments like this remind you of the beauty of humanity, please like the video and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss more powerful stories that celebrate compassion, courage, and the simple acts of kindness that can change a spate. Life. In the crisp autumn air of Chicago, Illinois, in the year 2025, the city moved with its usual restless energy. October had painted the leaves in shades of gold and deep crimson along the lakefront. But on the south side, where the wind cut sharper and the buildings stood more worn, the season felt heavier. Vincent Rossi, a fair-skinned man of American birth, walked through the doors of the Shine Bright Community Center with the measured stride of someone who commanded rooms without needing to raise his voice. At 39 years old, he was known in certain circles as a powerful figure in Chicago's construction world, legitimate contracts that built high-rises downtown while quieter interests kept the balance in neighborhoods few outsiders understood. Wealth clung to him like a second skin, the tailored charcoal overcoat, the subtle gleam of a silver watch chain at his vest, the quiet confidence that made people step aside without quite knowing why. Yet beneath that polished surface, Vincent carried storms no one saw. A gnawing guilt had lived in his chest for years, a consuming remorse born from choices that once seemed necessary for survival and power. He told himself he protected his own, but in the quiet hours before dawn, violent emotional conflict tore at him. Memories of streets he had hardened himself against, lives touched by decisions made in the name of loyalty. Tonight he had come to the community health fundraiser, not by choice, but because visibility mattered in his world. Appearances kept the delicate peace between his legitimate empire and the shadows that sustained it. He moved through the crowded hall with quiet authority, nodding to organizers, shaking hands with donors who smiled too widely, all while his mind drifted to the weight he could never quite set down. Across the room in the records section, where volunteers sorted patient files under harsh fluorescent lights, stood Elena Ramirez. She was a woman in her early 30s, slender to the point of fragility, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail that spoke of practicality over vanity. Her clothes, a faded navy sweater with frayed cuffs and worn jeans, hung loosely on her malnourished frame. Life had stripped her bare in ways that left deep marks. She lived in one of the most destitute pockets of the South Side, in a cramped one-room apartment, where the wind whistled through cracks in the windows and the radiator worked only on the kindest nights. Sleep came in fragments. Many evenings she went to bed hungry so her young daughter could eat. The cold had become a constant companion, numbing her fingers as she walked long blocks to the clinic each day, her shoes thin and letting in the damp. Elena's existence was a series of unreasonable, unjust blows that seemed designed to break the spirit. Landlords raised rents without warning, forcing her to choose between medicine and rent. Food banks ran out before her turn came. Nights spent huddled under thin blankets while her little girl shivered beside her brought waves of humiliating powerlessness. She was often desperate, poor, and utterly without leverage, yet something resilient burned in her. She worked long hours at the clinic's records office, staying late to help sort files because babies did not time their arrivals around anyone's convenience, and someone had to keep the paperwork from collapsing. Her voice when she spoke was soft, timid, and polite, especially to those who carried authority. She had learned that visible need invited pity or contempt, and she could afford neither. That evening the fundraiser buzzed with the low hum of conversation and the clink of plastic cups filled with cheap coffee. Elena had stayed late again, her back aching from hours bent over boxes, when a tall figure approached the side table. Vincent needed directions to the main donation area. He asked plainly, his tone even. Elena looked up once, her eyes meeting his, without the usual flicker of recognition or fear that his name sometimes provoked in others. She answered clearly, pointing the way, then returned to her files. No exaggerated smile, no nervous laughter, just quiet self-containment. Vincent paused a second longer than necessary. Something in her steady composure irritated and intrigued him at once. Most people reacted to his presence, some with deference, others with calculated warmth. She did neither. He found himself asking, "You work here?" "Yes," she replied softly, not lifting her gaze fully. "You are not joining the event. I am still working." Her voice remained polite, almost timid, yet carried an underlying strength. He almost smiled, though the expression felt foreign on his face. At this hour, Elena glanced at the overflowing tray of files, then back at him. Children do not time their needs around fundraising events. The words landed with simple truth, cutting through the polished chatter around them. Vincent felt an unexpected pull. In his world of calculated moves and guarded loyalties, her plain honesty stirred something deep. He returned 3 days later with paperwork his associates claimed was needed for a donation, though it was not strictly necessary. Then again the following week with a list of donated medical supplies. Each time he told himself it was business. Each time the excuse felt thinner. On the third visit he came with no pretense at all. He waited outside the clinic at closing holding 2 cups of hot cocoa from a nearby stand, the steam rising in the October chill. Elena emerged, her thin coat doing little against the wind that whipped down the street. She looked tired, her steps careful as if every movement cost energy she barely had. "I wanted to see you," Vincent said simply when she noticed him. She stopped, eyes widening with a mix of confusion and guarded caution. Horror flickered briefly. Why would a man like this seek her out? Anxiety tightened her chest. She was powerless here, destitute in every visible way, and suddenly confronted by someone whose wealth radiated without effort. The fine leather of his shoes, the warmth of the coat that could probably pay her rent for months. I do not understand," she said, her voice soft and timid, polite even in her shock. "People like you do not come here without reason." Vincent felt the first fierce inner conflict surge. Guilt gnawed at him. How many times had his world ignored or crushed people like her? Remorse rose sharp and violent in his heart, clashing with an overwhelming surge of protective instinct he could not name. From the moment he had truly seen her love, pure, intense compassion had ignited in him like a flame in the dark. Not romance, but a deep, consuming need to shield her from the cruelty that had already taken so much. "I know why you should walk away," he told her quietly. "I also know I am asking anyway." Elena stood motionless, the wind tugging at her thin sweater. She felt dizzy for a moment, a wave of numbness and disorientation washing over her. Horror at her own vulnerability mixed with intense curiosity. Why her? Why now? She was so desperately poor, so humiliated by the constant struggle, skipping meals, enduring cold nights, where her daughter's small body pressed against hers for warmth, yet this powerful man stood before her, offering cocoa, his fair-skinned face showing lines of quiet strain that spoke of his own hidden burdens. She took the cup with trembling hands, her fingers brushing his. The warmth spread through her chilled skin like a small mercy. "Just because I take this does not mean I trust you," she whispered, her voice polite but edged with fear and guarded resolve. "That is fair," Vincent replied. Inside, his emotional turmoil intensified. Consuming remorse for the life he led tore at him. How could he, with blood on his hands from street confrontations that kept his empire intact, dare approach someone so pure in her struggle? Violent conflict raged in his chest power, demanding he walk away, compassion refusing to let go. Their conversations began in ordinary places. A modest diner where the booth smelled of coffee and grease, a park bench overlooking the lake where October winds carried the scent of distant rain. Vincent listened when she spoke of her daughter Mia, a bright 7-year-old who already understood too much about hunger and worry. He remembered small details, how Elena bought cheap bread from the corner store, after long shifts how Mia's school shoes had holes that let in the cold. He never turned concern into control. Instead, he arrived when he said he would, bringing warm blankets or extra groceries in unmarked bags, always careful not to shame her. Elena remained cautious. At times she felt deep disorientation. Why would a wealthy, powerful man care for someone as pitiful as her? She was thin, sleep-deprived, her face pale from months of stretching every dollar until it screamed. Unjust situations piled on, an eviction notice slipped under her door for a rent hike. She could not meet a clinic shift cut because funding was short, nights where she lay awake listening to Mia's stomach growl softly. These moments stripped her misery bare. Drawing tears, she hid in the dark. Yet in Vincent's presence, a timid curiosity grew alongside the fear. His voice, steady and deep, carried an undercurrent of remorse she sensed but could not name. One evening, after a tense street encounter Vincent had navigated earlier that day, words exchanged with rival crew members on a shadowed corner, threats veiled as business that left his pulse racing with the constant tightrope of his life, he found Elena waiting outside the clinic, her thin coat pulled tight. A minor confrontation had flared when a supplier tried to shortchange a community delivery. Vincent had resolved it with calm authority, but the incident stirred fresh guilt. Power protected some and crushed others. He wondered as the wind howled whether he deserved even this small connection. "You look troubled," Elena said softly, her voice timid yet kind. She swayed slightly, a wave of dizziness from skipped meals hitting her. Confusion and anxiety flickered across her face. "Is everything all right?" Vincent met her eyes, the inner storm raging harder. Fierce conflict tore at him. Remorse for the world, he upheld a passionate surge of responsibility toward this vulnerable woman and her child. He wanted only to protect them, to lift the weight of poverty that humiliated her daily. "Some days the city feels heavier than others," he admitted. "But seeing you reminds me there is still good worth fighting for." Their worlds stood in stark contrast. the gap widening with every shared moment. His wealth showed in subtle ways, the driver waiting discreetly at the curb, the warm car that could shield her from the biting wind, the resources that could erase her debts in an instant. Hers remained exposed, the threadbare gloves with holes, the way she counted coins for bus fare, the quiet dignity with which she endured it all. Absurdly unfair events continued, a food pantry closing early, leaving her and Mia with empty cupboards, a neighbor's illness forcing Elena to take extra unpaid hours while her own health faded. Through it all, quiet, emotional stillness settled between them during long silences on the bench or in the diner. Vincent felt his heart crack open wider each time. The father-child bond he had never known how to form stirred powerfully as he thought of Mia, the little girl he had glimpsed once from afar, small, observant, carrying burdens no child should. Compassion flooded him, mixed with responsibility that felt heavier than any empire. He would protect them. He must. Elena, for her part, moved from deep suspicion to an overwhelming protective warmth. She remained guarded, fearful of the power imbalance, yet curious about the man whose eyes held such hidden pain. In one frozen moment outside her building, as wind whipped trash along the gutter, and she fumbled with keys to a door that barely locked, she looked at him with shock and disorientation. "Why do you keep coming back?" Her voice was soft, polite, trembling with the weight of her powerlessness. Vincent's reply came from the deepest part of his turmoil. Because some things are worth protecting even when the world says they should not exist. Guilt and remorse clashed violently inside him, but the compassion won fierce, unwavering, centered now on the child he had not yet met but already felt responsible for. The October night deepened around them, the city lights blurring in the distance. Two worlds had brushed against each other, and neither would emerge unchanged. The setup was complete. A powerful man burdened by inner storms, drawn to rescue a destitute woman and her daughter from the cruel edge of poverty. The attraction was not romance, but a profound call to compassion, protection, and the slow healing of wounds carried by both the strong and the fragile. In the quiet that followed, the first threads of a father-child bond began to form, unspoken, powerful, and destined to reshape everything. The weeks that followed carried the sharp bite of late October in Chicago, 2025. Leaves had fallen in thick drifts along the sidewalks, and the wind off Lake Michigan turned colder, slicing through thin jackets like a reminder that winter would not wait. Vincent Rossi moved through his days with the same measured power that defined him. Boardrooms where construction contracts worth millions were signed with a quiet nod. Phone calls that settled disputes between rival factions before they could ignite. His wealth showed in the details, the black town car that waited without comment, the heavy wool coat that turned away the harshest gusts, the silver pocket watch that ticked steadily in his vest pocket, a family heirloom from his grandfather's days on the Chicago railroads. Yet inside, the storms grew fiercer. Every meeting with Elena Ramirez deepened the violent conflict tearing at his heart. From the first moment he had truly seen her thin-guarded, carrying the weight of impossible days. Compassion had ignited in him like a flame that refused to die. It was not romance. It was a fierce, burning attachment, a passionate need to protect and lift her from the abyss that had already swallowed so much of her life. He felt it as an overwhelming surge the moment he handed her that first cup of hot cocoa, responsibility, tenderness, and a gnawing remorse that whispered he had no right. How could a man whose hands had steered the balance of power through tense street corners dare approach someone so fragile? The inner torment intensified with every visit. Guilt clawed at him during quiet nights in his downtown penthouse where heated floors and thick windows mocked the cold she endured. Violent emotional conflict raged, power demanding distance, compassion refusing to release its hold. Elena remained a study in quiet endurance and growing inner turmoil. She lived in absolute extremity of poverty, in a single damp room in a crumbling South Side building, where the wind whistled through gaps around the window frame and the radiator coughed weakly on the coldest nights. She was painfully thin, her cheeks hollow from months of stretching every dollar until nothing remained. Malnourished and sleep-deprived, she often lay awake listening to her 7-year-old daughter Mia shiver under a single thin blanket, the child's small body pressed close for warmth. Many nights Elena went without food so Mia could have the last slice of bread or the final spoonful of cheap soup. Humiliating situations piled on without mercy. The landlord sliding an eviction notice under the door for a sudden rent increase she could not possibly meet. The corner store refusing her credit when her shift at the clinic ran late and pay was short. The food pantry closing its doors early, leaving her standing in the wind with empty hands while other families turned away. These absurdly unfair blows stripped her misery, bare filling her with deep, pitiful shame and a numbness that made her steps falter. Yet in Vincent's presence something shifted. From initial deep suspicion she moved toward an overwhelming trust and attachment, passionate and intense, burning quietly in her chest. She remained at times desperate and powerless. Her voice soft, timid, and polite. When she spoke to him, the older, powerful man whose world seemed impossibly far from hers. At other moments, confusion, fear, and guarded curiosity flickered across her face, followed by shock and deep disorientation that left her dizzy, numb, and fighting for balance. One gray afternoon, after Vincent had quietly resolved a tense confrontation on a shadowed street corner, words exchanged with a rival crew leader who had tried to muscle into one of his legitimate supply routes, he drove to the clinic. The encounter had been bold and unexpected. Raised voices, veiled threats about territory, and respect the kind of standoff that could have escalated but ended with calm authority on his part. It left fresh remorse burning in his veins. How many lives were bruised by the invisible lines he helped maintain? He found Elena outside her thin sweater, offering almost no protection against the wind. She swayed slightly as she locked the door, a wave of dizziness washing over her from another skipped meal. "You came again," she said softly, her voice timid and polite, eyes lowered in habitual caution. Anxiety tightened her chest. Horror at her own vulnerability rose how pitiful she must look. Thin and exhausted, standing before a man whose coat alone could have paid her rent for months. "I said I would," Vincent replied. He offered her a warm paper bag containing soup and fresh bread from a nearby diner. Inside, his heart tore violently. Consuming remorse clashed with the fierce attachment he felt toward her and the child he had only glimpsed in stories. He wanted to shield them both, to erase the daily humiliations that ground her down. The disparity felt cruel. His wealth allowed him to command resources that could rewrite her reality, while she endured nights of biting cold where sleep came only in exhausted fragments. They walked together to a small park bench, sheltered somewhat from the wind. Quiet, emotional stillness settled between them as the city hummed in the distance. Elena ate slowly, savoring each spoonful as if afraid it might vanish. Tears pricked her eyes, not from the food alone, but from the overwhelming surge of trust building inside her. Someone powerful saw her not as a burden, but as someone worth protecting. The feeling was intense, almost frightening in its warmth, yet confusion and fear lingered. Why her? Why now? She felt disoriented, a numbness spreading through her limbs, as the reality of his kindness clashed with years of abandonment. Vincent watched her, the inner conflict growing more violent. Gnawing guilt tore at him during the silence. He had built an empire on strength and calculated control. Yet here was a woman whose quiet resilience exposed every crack in his armor. The fatherly responsibility he felt toward little Mia, whom Elena described with such tender worry, deepened the torment. He imagined the child's small face, already too wise for her years, and the urge to protect her burned hotter than any street confrontation. Days turned into another week. Unreasonable injustices continued to strike Elena with absurd cruelty. Her clinic hours were cut without notice because of budget shortfalls, leaving her with even less to feed Mia. A neighbor's sudden illness meant Elena spent an entire night caring for the woman's children, returning home at dawn, only to find her own heat shut off for a missed payment she had not been warned about. She endured the cold wind that night, huddled with Mia, both shivering under every scrap of fabric they owned. The humiliation was profound, powerless, desperate, her body aching from exhaustion and hunger. Inner torment raged, fierce shame mixed with a growing, passionate attachment to the man who kept returning. Vincent learned of the cut-off heat through a quiet inquiry. That evening he arrived with thick blankets and a portable heater, placing them inside her door without fanfare. "You do not have to accept them," he said gently when she opened the door, her eyes wide with shock and confusion. "But I cannot stand by while the cold takes what little warmth you have left." Elena's hands trembled as she touched the soft fabric. Tears welled up. I do not know how to thank someone like you," she whispered, her voice soft and timid, polite, even as horror at her dependency washed over her. Dizziness made her reach for the doorframe. The disparity felt violently, tearing his effortless wealth against her utter misery. Yet trust surged stronger, an intense burning attachment that made her chest ache with both fear and hope. Their conversations deepened in simple American settings, the corner diner where the booths were worn but warm, a quiet stretch of lakeside path where October leaves crunched underfoot. Vincent listened as Elena spoke of Mia's school struggles, the way the girl already understood that money changed how adults breathed. He remembered the small details, how Elena bought the cheapest milk, how she mended Mia's clothes with careful stitches late at night. He never pushed. He simply arrived when he promised, bringing small comforts wrapped in brown paper so they would not feel like charity. One evening after another, tense street confrontation this time, an unexpected encounter with rivals near a construction site where supplies had mysteriously gone missing. Vincent felt the weight of his world press heavier. Words had been exchanged in low, firm tones under flickering streetlights. Territory lines redrawn without fists, but the threat had lingered in the air like smoke. The incident stirred fresh, violent conflict in his heart. Remorse consumed him as he drove to meet Elena. How could he protect her, when his own life balanced on such precarious edges? He found her sitting on the familiar bench, Mia asleep at home under the new blankets. Elena looked up, her face pale from another long, hungry day. "You look troubled again," she said softly, her voice carrying that timid politeness. Curiosity and fear mixed in her eyes. She felt a wave of numbness, the kind that came when hope clashed too sharply with reality. Vincent sat beside her, the silver pocket watch heavy in his pocket. The inner tearing intensified to a breaking point. Gnawing guilt over the life he led, warred with the overwhelming compassion that had taken root the first moment he saw her. He wanted to shield this woman and her daughter from every unjust blow. The father-child bond he felt toward Mia, though he had not yet met her, fully grew fierce and protective. In a quiet, condensed moment of emotional stillness, he reached into his coat and withdrew the silver pocket watch. "This belonged to my grandfather," he said, his voice low. "It has measured time through hard years in this city. I want you to have it." He opened the cover gently, revealing the engraving inside. "For our time. V." Elena stared at the watch, her thin fingers trembling as she took it. Shock and deep disorientation washed over her dizziness, a rush of heat to her face followed by numbness. Horror at accepting something so valuable from a man of his power mixed with intense curiosity and an overwhelming surge of trust. Tears slipped down her cheeks. "It is too much," she whispered, voice soft and polite, cracking with emotion. "I have nothing to give in return. I am only... this." She gestured weakly at her worn clothes, the visible proof of her humiliating poverty. Vincent's heart tore violently. Consuming remorse flooded him. How many times had his world ignored suffering like hers? Yet the attachment burned brighter, passionate, and protective. "You do not need to give anything," he replied. "This time, the time you and Mia have endured, it matters. I want to mark the moment my life felt like it could still do something good." Quiet stillness settled again as the wind rustled the last leaves. Elena held the watch close, its weight unfamiliar yet strangely anchoring. Inside, her trust had become something deeper, an intense burning attachment born from the first cocoa and deepened through every small act of kindness. She felt confused and fearful still, the power imbalance dizzying, yet the compassion Vincent offered felt like the first real warmth in years of cold nights. Vincent sat beside her, the violent inner conflict raging harder than ever. Remorse for his hidden life clashed with fierce responsibility. He would protect them. He would find a way to shield this vulnerable woman and her child from the cruelty that had already taken so much. The disparity between his wealth cars, resources, the ability to command safety, and her absolute poverty only sharpened the ache. As October drew toward its close, the relationship had built in ordinary, honest places. No grand gestures, only truth enough to trouble both their hearts. Vincent's overwhelming compassion, born in the first moment, and growing more intense, now centered on the child he had not yet held, but already felt bound to protect. Elena's trust, passionate and fierce beneath her timid voice, had taken root despite the horror of her powerlessness. The watch ticked softly between them, measuring time that felt both stolen and newly possible. In the quiet of that lakeside bench, two worlds had begun to entwine, not in romance, but in the slow, deep promise of compassion, protection, and the healing father-child bond that was quietly forming around a small girl named Mia. November had not yet arrived, but the wind in Chicago already carried the promise of harsher days ahead in this October of 2025. The lakefront turned steel gray under low clouds, and on the south side the streets felt narrower, the cold more personal. Vincent Rossi moved through his empire with the same quiet authority that had built it morning meetings in glass-walled offices, where construction bids worth tens of millions were decided with a single nod, afternoon calls that kept delicate balances between factions intact. His wealth revealed itself more openly now in small, effortless ways. The heated leather seats of the town car, the cashmere scarf that turned away the biting wind, the silver pocket watch that ticked steadily against his chest, like a reminder of time he desperately wanted to protect. Yet the inner tearing in Vincent's heart had grown brutally intense. The overwhelming compassion he felt for Elena Ramirez and her daughter Mia, born in the very first moment he had seen Elena's quiet dignity, now burned like a live coal. It was not romance. It was a fierce, passionate attachment centered on protection and responsibility. A fatherly instinct that had taken root around the child he had not yet fully met, but already loved in the deepest part of his soul. Every quiet moment with Elena sharpened the violent conflict inside him. Gnawing remorse clawed at his chest during sleepless nights in his penthouse, where warmth and safety mocked the suffering he knew existed only miles away. How could a man whose world rested on calculated power and hidden tensions dare bring light into lives so fragile? The remorse turned violent when he thought of Mia. Small, observant, already carrying burdens no 7-year-old should. I know. He wanted to shield them both from every cruel wind. Yet the very power that could protect them also cast long, dangerous shadows. Elena's days remained a relentless procession of humiliating poverty that stripped her spirit raw. She was painfully thin, her frame weakened by months of malnutrition, her eyes shadowed from nights when sleep came only in exhausted snatches. The wind whistled through the cracks in her single room, turning blankets into useless scraps against the cold. Many evenings she went to bed with an empty stomach so Mia could have the last bowl of thin soup or the final piece of bread. Absurdly unfair events continued without mercy, the utility company shutting off her electricity for a missed payment she had not been warned about in time, forcing her and Mia to huddle together in darkness while the wind howled. Outside, the clinic reducing her hours again because of sudden budget cuts, leaving her counting pennies for bus fare she could barely afford. A landlord's notice demanding an immediate rent increase she had no way to meet. These blows left her desperate, powerless, and filled with deep, pitiful shame. She endured them with quiet dignity, but inside torment raged fierce anxiety that Mia would suffer more confusion at a world that seemed determined to break her. Despite everything, her trust in Vincent had become an intense, burning attachment. From the first cup of cocoa, suspicion had slowly transformed into overwhelming warmth and reliance. She remained at times fearful, and guarded her voice soft, timid, and polite when she spoke to the older, powerful man whose kindness felt both miraculous and terrifying. At other moments, shock and deep disorientation washed over her dizziness that made her reach for walls, numbness in her limbs, a painful ache in her chest when the disparity between their worlds became too sharp. One late afternoon after Vincent had navigated another tense street confrontation, unexpected words with a rival faction leader near a Southside warehouse where supply lines were being tested. He drove straight to Elena's neighborhood. The standoff had been bold and unnerving. Low voices under flickering streetlights, veiled challenges about respect and territory. The kind of moment where one wrong word could shift delicate balances. He had held his ground with calm authority, but the encounter left fresh remorse burning hotter. How many invisible battles did he fight to keep his world stable? And how easily could those shadows touch the two lives he now cared for more than his own power? He found Elena outside her building, clutching a thin coat around her shoulders as the wind whipped trash along the gutter. She looked even more fragile than usual, her face pale from another day without proper food. When she saw him, a flicker of relief crossed her features, followed quickly by guarded fear. "You came," she said softly, her voice timid and polite, eyes lowered in habitual caution. Anxiety tightened her throat. Horror rose at how pitiful she must appear, thin, exhausted, standing before a man whose coat alone could have fed her and Mia for weeks. "I promised I would," Vincent replied. He carried a warm bag with soup, fresh bread, and a small coat for Mia. Inside, his heart tore with violent intensity. Consuming remorse flooded him as he looked at her hollow cheeks and the way she swayed slightly from dizziness. The fatherly bond he felt toward Mia deepened the conflict. How could he protect a child he had not yet held when his own life balanced on such dangerous edges? The disparity felt cruelly sharp, his effortless wealth against her absolute misery. They sat together on the worn steps of her building, a small pocket of quiet, emotional stillness amid the noise of the street. Elena ate slowly, tears gathering as the warmth spread through her chilled body. "I do not know why you keep helping us," she whispered, her voice soft and trembling. "I have nothing to offer. I am only a burden." Vincent's chest tightened with extreme psychological shock. The words struck him like a physical blow. Gnawing guilt clashed violently with the passionate attachment that had burned since the first day. "You are not a burden," he said quietly, voice steady despite the inner storm. "You and Mia. You remind me that some things are still worth protecting with everything I have." Elena looked up, confusion and fear mixing with heightened curiosity. A wave of numbness washed over her, followed by sharp pain in her temples from exhaustion and hunger. The kindness felt overwhelming, almost too much for someone who had known only hardship. Trust surged stronger, an intense, burning attachment that made her want to believe in safety for the first time in years. But the world refused to grant them peace. The next day brought another absurdly unfair blow. Elena received a call from Mia's school. The girl had fallen ill with a fever, and the nurse insisted she needed medicine and rest. Elena rushed there after her shift, only to learn the rent had been raised again without notice, and the landlord had begun eviction proceedings. She stood on the windy street afterward, clutching Mia's small hand, tears freezing on her cheeks as the cold bit through her thin clothes. Powerless and desperate, she felt her inner world violently tearing apart, shame at her inability to provide, horror at what might happen to her daughter. Deep disorientation that left her dizzy and struggling for balance. Vincent learned of the situation through a discreet inquiry. That evening he arrived with funds quietly placed in an envelope and arrangements for a doctor's visit. He found Elena and Mia in their cold room, the little girl resting fitfully under thin blankets. The sight struck him with fresh, violent conflict. Remorse consumed him as he watched Elena's trembling hands. How could he, with all his resources, allow this to continue? The fatherly instinct toward Mia, seeing her small, feverish face, intensified the torment to an almost unbearable level. In the quiet stillness that followed as Mia slept, and the heater he had provided hummed softly, Elena turned to him. "You are changing everything," she said softly, her voice timid yet filled with overwhelming trust. "I am afraid. Afraid this is only a dream that will end." Vincent felt the inner tearing reach new depths. Gnawing remorse for the hidden parts of his life warred with fierce determination. He wanted to shield them completely, to rewrite the daily humiliations that ground Elena down and threatened Mia. Yet danger lurked closer than he realized. Unknown to both of them, Vincent's father, the aging and ruthless Don Rossi, had begun to hear whispers. The old man, still the unseen force behind much of the family's power, viewed any softness as a fatal weakness. In the dimly lit study of his own fortified home, he listened to reports with cold calculation. A son showing attachment to a destitute woman and her child from the south side threatened the careful order he had maintained for decades. Whispers of Vincent's visits had reached him through drivers and street contacts. The old Don saw not compassion but vulnerability that could be exploited by rivals or used to fracture loyalty within the organization. One cold evening, as Vincent left Elena's building after another quiet moment of stillness, watching her hold the silver pocket watch with trembling fingers, the engraving, "For our time." Catching the weak light, he received a call. His father wanted to see him immediately. The confrontation in the old Don's study was quiet but devastating. The elder Rossi stood by the heavy oak desk, his face carved with years of hard authority. A records clerk from the south side, he asked, voice low and dangerous. "You intend to risk everything we have built over a woman with nothing, and a child who is not even yours by blood in the eyes of our world." Vincent felt the violent inner conflict explode. Remorse and guilt tore at him with fresh brutality. He had hidden the depth of his attachment, but now it stood exposed. "She and the child need protection," he said, voice steady despite the storm inside. "I will not turn away." The old Don smiled thinly, the kind of smile that hid calculations sharper than any street confrontation. Protection has limits when it threatens the family. Some complications must be removed before they become irreversible. Vincent left the meeting with his heart in turmoil, the gnawing remorse now mixed with a growing sense of dread. He did not know the full extent of his father's resolve, but he felt the shadows lengthening. Days later, the orchestrated betrayal began to unfold in silence. While Vincent was pulled away on unavoidable business, resolving another tense, unexpected confrontation with a rival faction on the west side. Words exchanged in a dimly lit parking garage that left him drained. The old Don moved. A message was sent to Elena through a seemingly innocent channel. A distant relative was ill and urgently needed her help across the city. The timing felt odd. The details vague, but family obligation ran deep in Elena. She hesitated, fear and confusion rising, yet the pull of duty won. Vincent had warned her to wait for his return, but she believed she could go and return quickly, protecting the fragile new safety she had found. She left Mia with a trusted neighbor and took the bus toward the address, her thin coat pulled tight against the October wind. Anxiety gnawed at her during the ride, dizziness from hunger, numbness in her hands, a deep disorientation that made the city lights blur. She clutched the silver pocket watch in her pocket like a talisman, its weight, a small anchor of trust in Vincent's promise. What waited for her was not a sick relative. The old Don's people had arranged a quiet interception, polite words from men in plain clothes who claimed there had been a change en route for safety. Elena argued softly, her voice timid and polite, even in rising fear. Horror flooded her as she realized something was terribly wrong. When she tried to step away, the vehicle swerved sharply on the wet road, clipping the shoulder and rolling into a ditch filled with cold water and brush. The accident was swift and cruel. Elena suffered a severe head injury that scattered her memories into fragments. By the time help arrived, the old Don's arrangements were already in motion. Papers altered, a substituted report, suggesting tragedy, the kind of quiet machinery that made inconvenient truths disappear without noise. Vincent was told later that evening, through carefully managed channels, that there had been a terrible accident. The details were delivered with calculated mercy. No need to view remains that were too damaged. Grief stunned him into a numb obedience shaped by years of family structure and urgency. He believed what he was given. In the quiet of his penthouse that night, as October rain began to fall, Vincent sat with the weight of unbearable loss. The inner tearing became almost unbearable, violent remorse for not being there, consuming guilt that he had somehow failed the two lives that had given his hardened heart purpose. The fatherly bond he felt toward Mia, the passionate attachment to protecting Elena, now collided with devastating finality. He clutched the memory of the silver pocket watch like a wound that would never close. The betrayal had been orchestrated in silence, and the first act of the greater tragedy had begun. Two worlds that had only just begun to touch had been violently torn apart, leaving only the cold wind and the ticking of time that no longer felt like it belonged to them. Vincent Rossi sat alone in his downtown penthouse, the city spread beneath him like a kingdom he no longer wanted to rule. The news of the accident had arrived through carefully worded calls and official-looking papers. Elena Ramirez gone. The vehicle lost on a wet road remains too damaged for viewing. Grief struck him with the force of a physical blow. He had believed every detail, stunned into numb obedience by the machinery of family structure and the urgency with which the loss was presented. The silver pocket watch, its engraving for our time, V, now a cruel echo, lay heavy in his palm. Inside Vincent, the inner tearing grew to an almost unbearable intensity. Consuming remorse flooded every quiet moment. He replayed the last conversations with Elena, her soft, timid voice, the way she had held the watch as if it were the only solid thing in her world. Violent emotional conflict raged in his heart, gnawing guilt that he had not been there to protect her, and little Mia fierce self-reproach for allowing his dangerous world to brush against their fragile lives even from a distance. The fatherly bond he had felt toward Mia, the passionate attachment born the first moment he saw Elena's quiet strength, now twisted into devastating loss. How could he, a wealthy and powerful man who commanded resources that could reshape neighborhoods, have failed the two souls who had awakened compassion in him? Nights blurred into days. As he moved through meetings like a ghost, his fair-skinned face drawn the lines of strain deeper. His wealth, private cars, heated offices, the ability to silence problems with a word felt hollow and mocking. Power that could not shield innocence became its own punishment. He buried the pain in work, resolving tense street confrontations with rival factions that arose more frequently now. One unexpected encounter happened near a construction site on the west side. Rival voices, rising in the rain-soaked shadows, veiled challenges about territory and respect. Vincent stood firm with calm authority, words exchanged in low, measured tones that prevented escalation, but left fresh scars of remorse. Another confrontation flared on a south side corner when a supplier tested boundaries. Again, he diffused it without violence, yet each incident sharpened the violent conflict inside him. Every standoff reminded him of the shadows he had tried to keep from Elena and Mia. The remorse became a constant gnawing presence, tearing at him during moments of quiet stillness when the city lights blurred through rain-streaked windows. While Vincent grieved in the insulated world of power, Elena Ramirez survived in a reality more brutal than any he could imagine. The accident had left her with a severe head injury that shattered her memory into scattered fragments. She woke in a crowded public hospital, pain bright and disorienting voices blurring around her. She could speak, but names, faces, and the shape of her own life slipped away like smoke. The silver pocket watch, still wrapped in cloth beside her bed, made her fingers tremble with unexplained emotion. Horror and anxiety washed over her in waves. Deep disorientation that caused dizziness, numbness, and sudden loss of balance when she tried to stand. She felt confused and fearful, a powerless woman suddenly adrift without context. Discharged with no identification and nowhere to go, Elena was taken in by a kind older neighbor woman named Mama Rosa, who had helped with accident victims that day. Mama Rosa lived on the far edge of the south side, in a small rundown house where the wind still whistled through gaps and the roof leaked during heavy rains. Elena's poverty, already extreme before the accident, became even more pitiful and humiliating in the months that followed. She was painfully thin and malnourished. Her body weakened further by the injury and the difficult birth that came 7 weeks later, under another cold October night of pouring rain. The baby, a girl she named Mia because the name arrived unbidden and made her chest ache with phantom recognition, screamed into the world with fierce lungs. Elena held her tiny daughter, close tears mixing with rain on the window pane, while Mama Rosa offered what little comfort she could. Raising Mia alone in hardship, Elena also cared for Tommy, a vulnerable 6-year-old boy who had become Mia's loyal best friend. Tommy came from an even more broken foster situation passed between homes, street smart but deeply distrustful, often hungry and frightened. The two children clung to each other in the small, damp room they shared with Elena. Absurdly unfair events continued to strike without mercy. The utility company cut power again for unpaid bills Elena could not meet. Food assistance ran out before their turn. Nights of biting cold wind left them huddled under thin blankets, sleep fractured by coughing and shivering. Elena worked where she could, sorting vegetables at early morning markets, washing laundry for neighbors, mending clothes with hands that still trembled from injury. She remained desperate, impoverished, and powerless, her voice soft, timid, and polite when she spoke to anyone in authority. At times, confusion and fear gripped her. At others, guarded curiosity flickered, when a smell or distant sound stirred something buried in her shattered memory. She clung to the silver pocket watch without understanding why. Selling it was suggested more than once, but panic rose so violently in her chest, dizziness, numbness, sharp pain, that even Mama Rosa stopped asking. The watch became a silent talisman, its weight, a small anchor in days of utter misery. Elena's inner world tore with quiet intensity horror. At her inability to provide for the children, anxiety that Mia and Tommy would suffer the same cold, wind-filled nights she had endured. Deep shame at her thin, exhausted frame. Yet kindness still lived in her soft words to calm Tommy's nightmares, gentle songs to Mia when fever came. This quiet resilience stood in stark contrast to the cruelty around them. Vincent, meanwhile, had grown harder on the surface. People said tragedy had matured him, but those who knew him saw only a man using his body as borrowed property. He threw himself into empire building, more construction contracts, firmer control over factions. Wealth displayed itself with increasing intensity. The new vehicles, the expanded offices, the ability to redirect resources with a single call. Yet in private moments the remorse became violently consuming. He never married, pulling back from arrangements others tried to make. Each time proximity to suitable partners felt like betrayal of the quiet promise he had made on that lakeside bench. The fatherly ache for a child he believed lost tore at him during sleepless nights, the inner conflict leaving him numb and hollow. Unreasonable injustices continued to batter Elena's small household. One week, the market stall where she sorted produce closed, suddenly leaving her without income. Another time, a landlord raised rent again, forcing her to choose between medicine for Mia's recurring cough and food for all three. Tommy's distrust of the world deepened after a foster placement gone wrong, and he warned Mia in whispers that grown-ups with power only brought pain. Elena endured it all with pitiful dignity. Thin, sleep-deprived, her body aching from endless labor and the lingering effects of injury. Moments of quiet, emotional stillness came rarely, holding both children close on the coldest nights. The silver watch clutched in her hand as rain drummed on the roof. In those condensed silences, unexplained tears would come, as if some buried memory knocked gently but could not enter. Years passed in the shape hardship usually takes, slow grinding without dramatic rescue. Elena worked dawn markets and late sewing shifts, her kindness a small light in the darkness. Mia grew observant beyond her years, learning that money changed adult breathing and that smiles were sometimes borrowed. Tommy remained her fierce shadow, the two children finding small joys in shared games and whispered stories despite empty cupboards and cold floors. Elena's headaches worsened. Fainting spells came more often, yet she refused to complain. Her voice stayed soft and polite when speaking to clinic workers or landlords, even as inner torment raged fierce anxiety for the children's future, confusion at a life that felt both familiar and alien. Vincent continued his path of quiet power, resolving bold street confrontations when rivals tested boundaries. An unexpected standoff near the lakefront one evening, another in an alley where supply lines were threatened. Each time he diffused tension with measured words, but each encounter deepened the gnawing remorse. He told himself the empire provided stability, yet the loss of Elena and Mia haunted him like an unfinished wound. The fatherly instinct he had felt, the passionate attachment to protecting a vulnerable woman and child, had nowhere to go, turning inward into violent self-conflict. During long drives through the city he both ruled and mourned. In the small room on the south side, Elena sometimes dreamed of a man's voice, saying words she could not fully hear, only feel a promise of time that belonged to them. She would wake crying softly into her pillow, disoriented and numb, while Mia and Tommy slept beside her. The watch remained hidden at the bottom of a wooden trunk, its scratches a silent testament to survival. Outside, the October wind still howled, carrying the same cold that had defined so many of their nights. Two separate worlds carried on, one of wealth and buried grief, the other of absolute poverty and quiet endurance. The orchestrated betrayal had done its work, scattering lives that had only begun to touch. Yet time, measured by a silver pocket watch, and the steady hearts of two small children, continued ticking. The stage was set for a desperate act that would one day bridge the chasm, but for now grief and hardship reigned in their separate silences, tearing at hearts already pushed to the limit. Late October in Chicago, 2025, brought biting winds and gray skies that mirrored the heaviness settled over the South Side. The air carried the sharp chill of approaching winter, turning every breath visible and every night longer. Vincent Rossi, now 39, moved through his days with the composed exterior of a powerful man whose construction empire spanned legitimate high-rises downtown and quieter interests that maintained delicate balances across the blank city. His wealth displayed itself with increasing intensity: the sleek black vehicles that glided through traffic, the tailored coats that defied the cold, the private offices where decisions worth millions were made with quiet authority. Yet beneath the surface, the inner tearing in his heart had never eased. Grief over Elena Ramirez and the child he believed lost had hardened into a constant gnawing remorse that flared into violent conflict during unguarded moments. The fatherly attachment he had felt, the passionate protective instinct born the first time he saw Elena's quiet strength, remained a raw wound. Every tense street confrontation, he resolved, only sharpened the guilt. How could a man with such resources have failed to shield the vulnerable lives that had awakened compassion in him? One such confrontation unfolded unexpectedly on a windswept corner near a West Side warehouse. Rival voices rose in the fading light as a faction tested boundaries over supply routes. Vincent stood firm, exchanging measured words under the shadow of looming buildings, diffusing the tension with calm authority before it could escalate. The encounter left him drained fresh remorse, flooding his chest as he drove away. Each standoff reminded him of the shadows he carried, the same shadows that had perhaps touched the fragile world he had tried to protect. Meanwhile, Elena Ramirez endured in a reality of absolute humiliating poverty that grew more crushing with every passing day. She remained painfully thin and malnourished, her frame weakened by years of hardship, injury, and unrelenting labor. Sleep came in fractured pieces on the coldest nights when the wind howled through cracks in the walls of their small, damp room and the radiator offered only faint, unreliable warmth. She often went without food so that Mia and Tommy could eat the last scraps of bread or thin soup. The two children, 7-year-old Mia, bright-eyed yet already too observant, and her loyal best friend Tommy, a vulnerable boy of similar age marked by the foster system's cruelties, clung to each other like small anchors in a storm. Unreasonable and unjust situations continued to strike with absurd cruelty, exposing Elena's utter misery and tearing violently at her inner world. The market where she sorted vegetables closed suddenly due to funding cuts, leaving her without income for weeks. The landlord raised rent again without warning, forcing her to choose between medicine for Mia's persistent cough and keeping a roof overhead. One particularly cold evening, after a long day of washing laundry for neighbors, Elena returned to find the power shut off for yet another missed payment she had scraped together too late. She and the children huddled together under every scrap of fabric they owned, the wind whipping outside while hunger gnawed and exhaustion pressed down. Elena's voice stayed soft, timid, and polite when she spoke to anyone in authority at the clinic or assistance offices, even as horror, anxiety, and deep shame filled her. At times, confusion and fear gripped her. At others, guarded curiosity flickered, when a distant sound or smell stirred something buried and unexplained in her shattered memory. Dizziness and numbness often overtook her, causing loss of balance and sharp pain that left her leaning against walls. Despite the hardship, Elena's innate kindness endured. She offered gentle words to calm Tommy's nightmares and quiet songs to soothe Mia during feverish nights. The silver pocket watch remained hidden at the bottom of the old wooden trunk, its presence triggering unexplained panic whenever selling it was suggested. She did not understand why it mattered so deeply, only that parting with it felt like losing the last thread of something precious. Mia had grown into a child poverty, made painfully observant. At 7, she already understood how money changed the way adults breathed, and how smiles were sometimes borrowed to hide worry. Tommy, street-smart and distrustful from years of instability, stayed close to her, warning, in whispers that powerful people only brought trouble. The two children shared small moments of joy, whispered stories under thin blankets, games with scavenged scraps, yet the weight of their reality pressed heavily. The breaking point came on one of the coldest late October days. Elena's health had worsened sharply. Another fainting spell left her weak and feverish, her headaches blinding. The clinic doctor spoke of tests. She could not afford medicines out of reach. Mia listened from the bench outside her small face, serious as she counted the things they could not buy. That afternoon, while Elena rested uneasily after another dizzy spell, Mia opened the trunk looking for the small cloth purse where emergency coins were sometimes hidden. Instead, her fingers closed around the silver pocket watch. It felt heavy, valuable, grown-up in her hands. She turned it over, noticing the scratch near the hinge, and pressed the latch. Inside, though she could not fully read the engraving, she recognized the shine of something important. Value often has a shine that children in hardship learn to see faster than school teaches. Mia knew her mother needed medicine. She knew the cold nights and empty cupboards could not continue. With a practicality beyond her years, she wrapped the watch in a handkerchief and hid it under her faded dress. Tommy watched her with wide eyes, his distrust flaring immediately. "You cannot trust rich guys with something like that," he warned in a fierce whisper. "They take and never give back. My old placements taught me that." Mia hesitated, fear and confusion mixing in her young face, but determination won. "Mama is sick. We need money. I will be careful." The two children slipped out before dawn the next morning, riding with a kind trader heading toward downtown who believed they were meeting family. They arrived in the bustling city center, bigger and more frightening than anything they had known, the wind cutting sharper between tall buildings. By chance, or what would later feel like fate, they entered one of Vincent's legitimate antique and pawn shops, a quiet establishment absorbed years earlier into his broader holdings. Vincent did not usually spend time there, but on that particular afternoon a delayed meeting and a restless mind had drawn him in. He sat reviewing invoices with the manager, his powerful frame bent slightly over papers, the weight of unspoken grief still etched in the shadows under his eyes. Mia stepped inside. Small and determined, her dress faded at the shoulders, sandals dusty from the journey. Tommy hovered behind her, eyes wary. "I want to sell something," Mia said, her voice steady despite the fear. The manager began his usual gentle dismissal for children with trinkets, but Vincent looked up at the seriousness in the girl's tone. She unfolded the handkerchief. The silver pocket watch touched the counter. Vincent went still, not gradually, entirely. The room seemed to shift around him without sound. He knew the watch before his hand even reached it, the weight, the familiar scratch near the hinge, the absurdity of seeing it again after so many years. When he opened the cover and saw the engraving, something buried deep inside him tore open with violent force. "For our time. V." His breath caught. Extreme psychological shock flooded him, a numbness that made the world tilt. "Where did you get this?" he asked, voice low, the inner tearing intensifying to a breaking point. Remorse and hope clashed, violently gnawing guilt over the loss he had carried for years now, colliding with a surge of recognition. "It is my mother's," Mia replied. "She is sick. We need money." Vincent's heart pounded with overwhelming turmoil. "What is your mother's name?" Mia hesitated, cautious as children in hardship learn to be. Tommy tugged at her sleeve, whispering warnings. "Elena," she said finally. The name struck Vincent like a physical blow. The shop disappeared emotionally. All the years of grief folded inward until he felt himself standing at the edge of his own life, watching it split open. Violent inner conflict raged, consuming remorse for believing her gone, fierce hope that clashed with disbelief, the fatherly attachment he had never released, now surging back with passionate intensity. He sat down without meaning to the manager's concerned voice coming from far away. "You do not have to sell this today," Vincent said, struggling to keep his voice even. Inside, the emotional upheaval was devastating. The powerful man who commanded empires felt reduced to raw vulnerability at the sight of this small girl holding the symbol of a promise he thought broken forever. Mia looked at him, then at Tommy, calculating risk with exhausting seriousness. "I do," she answered firmly, the tone painfully familiar in its quiet resolve. Vincent swallowed hard, the disparity between his wealth and their visible poverty hitting him with fresh force. Her thin frame, the dusty sandals, the guarded fear in both children's eyes, everything spoke of nights of cold wind, skipped meals, and humiliating powerlessness. "What if I help your mother first?" he offered gently, "and we decide about the watch later?" Tommy stepped forward, distrust blazing. "We do not trust men like you. You probably hurt people." Mia quieted him with a look, but the warning hung in the air, adding layers of tension. Children raised in shortage do not trust offers quickly. Yet something in Vincent's shaking hands and the genuine intensity in his eyes reached Mia. She handed him a small clinic card from her pocket, the diagnosis notes scribbled there, speaking volumes of untreated suffering. Vincent took one look at the location and the notes, and he was already moving. He did not call assistance or delegate. He drove himself the town car, cutting through Chicago traffic with urgent purpose. His heart tore with increasing violence, remorse for the years lost, overwhelming compassion. reignited the fatherly bond toward this child. He now suspected was his own, surging like a flame. The disparity felt cruel. His resources that could command safety and care against the absolute misery these children had endured. Koforidua no, the rundown south side streets lay under a pale, unforgiving afternoon light. The narrow compound where Elena lived sat behind a small provision shop and a laundry line sagging with faded clothes. When Mia led him inside, Vincent had to steady himself against the doorframe. Grief, when resurrected, can mimic physical pain. Elena lay on a low bed by the window, thinner than memory allowed her face older than the years should have made her. She wore a faded wrapper and a worn blouse, one hand resting over her forehead. At the sound of footsteps, she opened her eyes, caution flickering in her gaze as she saw the stranger with her daughter. "Mia," she said, voice rough and soft. "Who is this?" Vincent stepped closer, the inner storm raging harder than ever. "My name is Vincent," he said quietly. The name moved across Elena's face, strangely not full recognition but a shadow passing over water, something disturbed then gone. She pushed herself upright too quickly and winced. "I do not know you." His throat tightened with extreme emotional shock. "No," he replied softly. "You do not." That was the beginning. Vincent moved them, Elena, Mia, and Tommy, to safety within hours, not to any ostentatious place tied to his public life, but to a quiet, secure house owned through a discreet trust. A nurse was arranged, appointments scheduled, resources made available so that no one would ever again weigh medicine against supper. He told the small staff they were under his personal protection, the phrase carrying enough weight to prevent questions. Elena accepted the help with guarded suspicion, memory loss having sharpened rather than dulled her instincts. Yet as the warmth of the new place reached her chilled bones and Mia slept easier for the first time in months, a fragile trust began to stir again, the same intense, burning attachment that had taken root years earlier now, flickering back to life, amid confusion and lingering fear. Vincent sat in a chair by the window that first evening, watching the children settle. The violent inner conflict continued to tear at him, gnawing remorse for the time stolen, overwhelming responsibility toward the child whose eyes held echoes of his own, and a deep, passionate drive to protect and heal what had been broken. In the quiet, condensed stillness of the room, with the silver pocket watch once more in his hands, he felt the years of grief beginning to crack open. The desperate act of a small girl carrying an old watch had bridged an impossible gap. The reunion had been triggered not by fate alone, but by a child's practical courage and the quiet endurance of a mother who had never stopped surviving. Yet the full weight of truth still waited in the shadows, and the emotional storms were only beginning to reveal their true depth. The late October light in Chicago, 2025, filtered pale and unforgiving through the windows of the quiet suburban safe house Vincent Rossi had arranged. The property sat discreetly behind a company trust, far from the polished downtown towers and the shadowed south side streets where Elena Ramirez had endured years of crushing hardship. Vincent moved with quiet purpose, his wealth revealing itself in the details that now surrounded them. The comfortable beds with thick blankets that held warmth through the night. The kitchen stocked with food that required no careful rationing, the live-in nurse, whose gentle presence ensured no one weighed medicine against survival. For a man who commanded construction empires and navigated the delicate balances of power, these arrangements were effortless, yet each one deepened the violent tearing in his heart. Vincent's inner turmoil had grown brutally intense since the moment the silver pocket watch had touched the counter in his shop. Consuming remorse clawed at him relentlessly, the years Elena and the children had suffered in absolute poverty, while he had moved through a world of resources and influence. Gnawing guilt mixed with fierce hope, creating violent emotional conflict that left him numb in quiet moments. The fatherly attachment he felt toward Mia, the passionate protective instinct that had ignited the first time he saw Elena's quiet dignity, now surged with overwhelming force. He wanted to shield them from every remaining shadow of their past misery, yet the disparity between his power and their former reality tore at him like an open wound. How could a wealthy man who resolved tense street confrontations with a single measured word have allowed such suffering to continue unchecked? One such confrontation had arisen unexpectedly, only hours after he brought them to safety. A rival faction, sensing a momentary distraction in Vincent's world, tested boundaries near one of his legitimate supply depots on the outskirts. Words were exchanged in low, firm tones under the cover of early evening shadows, veiled challenges about respect and territory that carried the weight of potential disruption. Vincent handled it with calm authority, diffusing the tension before it could escalate. But the incident left fresh remorse burning. Every bold standoff reminded him of the hidden dangers that had once brushed too close to the vulnerable lives he now sheltered. Elena accepted the help with deep suspicion sharpened by years of powerlessness. She was still painfully thin and malnourished, her body bearing the marks of endless cold nights, skipped meals, and sleep fractured by worry and pain. The contrast was stark and humiliating, the soft warmth of the safe house against the memory of wind whistling through cracks in their old room, the abundance of food against nights when she had gone hungry so Mia and Tommy could eat. At times she felt desperate and powerless, her voice remaining soft, timid, and polite when she spoke to the nurse or to Vincent, the older, powerful man whose kindness still felt dangerously immense. "Thank you," she would whisper, eyes lowered, anxiety tightening her chest. At other moments, confusion, fear, and guarded curiosity flickered across her face, followed by shock and deep disorientation that caused dizziness, numbness, loss of balance, and sharp headaches that made her wince and reach for support. The doctors confirmed what the small clinic had long feared: old traumatic brain injury with scar tissue, episodes of dissociation, headaches worsened by years of untreated stress and hardship. Memory loss was not total blankness, but a wall built from broken pieces. Language and habits remained, emotional responses lingered, yet the continuity of her own life had been shattered and left to scar over in poverty rather than heal. Elena let the tests happen, allowed the nurse to monitor her, and watched with cautious eyes as Mia and Tommy slept easier than they had in years. Yet when Vincent visited, she studied him like someone listening for hidden costs behind generosity. "You look at me as though I owe you something," she said on the third day, her voice soft and timid, polite, even in her guarded fear. A wave of dizziness washed over her as she sat up too quickly, leaving her numb and disoriented. Vincent leaned back in the chair by the window, too tired for pretense. The inner conflict raged: harder remorse for the time-stolen, overwhelming compassion that had burned since the first moment, and a deep responsibility that felt heavier than any empire. "Not oh," he replied quietly. "Remember." The word struck Elena with extreme psychological shock. Pain flickered across her face, not full recognition, but something disturbing the surface. "Please do not say things that make my head feel so full," she whispered, confusion and anxiety mixing with a fragile, burning attachment that had begun to reawaken despite her fear. Vincent closed his eyes briefly, the violent tearing inside him intensifying. He respected her pace, paying bills without fanfare, sitting through long doctor explanations and bringing small comforts he remembered from their earlier conversations. Warm soup, soft bread, without drawing attention to the gesture. His wealth allowed these acts to happen seamlessly, highlighting the cruel gap that had once left Elena thin, sleep-deprived, and humiliated by constant want. Mia became the gentle bridge. The 7-year-old's innocent kindness slowly melted the edges of Vincent's hardened exterior. She drew pictures of Mr. Vincent as a superhero and left them on the table. She shared her last piece of candy with a shy smile, asking him to read bedtime stories in a voice still carrying the caution of hardship. In quiet, condensed moments of emotional stillness, Vincent felt the father-child bond deepen with almost painful intensity. Watching Mia sleep peacefully for the first time in months stirred fierce protectiveness and consuming remorse for the years she had endured cold winds and empty cupboards. Tommy remained more guarded, creating tension and misunderstandings that added layers of drama. The vulnerable boy, shaped by the foster system's cruelties, distrusted Vincent deeply. "He is probably like the others," Tommy whispered to Mia one evening, eyes wary. "Powerful men only pretend to care until they hurt you." He hid Mia from Vincent's view during one visit, sparking a moment of confusion and fear in Elena, who worried the boy's distrust would close doors to safety. Vincent felt the sting of those words as fresh, remorse, violent inner conflict tearing at him, as he recognized how his world of power might appear to a child who had known only instability. Unreasonable injustices from Elena's past continued to echo even in safety. One afternoon she received a call from an old landlord demanding final payment for damages that had never existed, a final absurd blow that left her trembling with remembered powerlessness. The incident triggered a wave of numbness and pain, dizziness forcing her to sit as old humiliations flooded back. Vincent handled the matter quietly, with a single call, erasing the debt, but the event exposed the depth of her inner torment. Fierce shame at having been so utterly vulnerable, anxiety that the new safety might vanish as suddenly as it had appeared. As days passed, partial memories began to flicker in Elena. Sometimes Vincent's steady voice calmed her. At other times it unnerved her, stirring confusion and disorientation. When he said Mia's name with natural warmth, something in her face tightened, as if hearing an echo from another life. She allowed small touches of care, his hand steadying hers while signing consent forms, leaving her fingers resting a moment longer than necessary. Trust grew slowly, an intense burning attachment rekindling from the first moment of kindness, years ago now tempered by the reality of her changed self. Vincent, meanwhile, began asking careful questions behind the scenes. He reviewed old reports, spoke with discreet contacts, and pieced together fragments of the accident. Each new detail deepened the gnawing remorse and violent conflict in his heart. The fatherly bond toward Mia confirmed in his own quiet certainty, even before any test made the years of separation feel like a wound that refused to close. In moments of quiet, emotional stillness, sitting by the window while the children played safely in the yard, he felt the overwhelming surge of responsibility that had defined his attachment from the beginning. One evening after another, tense street confrontation, this time an unexpected encounter with rivals near a lakeside construction project. Where words about loyalty and boundaries were exchanged in the gathering dusk, Vincent returned, drained. The standoff had been bold, the tension thick, yet resolved without escalation. Still, it reminded him of the precarious balance he maintained, and the remorse it stirred made him more determined to protect this fragile new beginning. He found Elena sitting with Mia and Tommy, the silver pocket watch resting on the table between them. The children had been clicking it open and shut, though they knew it was not a toy. Elena looked up, her face softer than before, though still guarded. "The children trust you more each day," she said softly, her voice timid, yet carrying a note of wonder. I feel something when you are near. Not fear exactly, but a fullness in my head that confuses me." Vincent knelt to Mia's level, the inner tearing reaching new depths. Extreme psychological shock mixed with profound tenderness as the little girl leaned against his arm for a moment. The disparity between his wealth and the children's former life nights of cold wind, humiliating want. Desperate powerlessness struck him with fresh force. He wanted only to heal what had been broken, to offer the protection and stability that had been stolen from them. In the condensed stillness that followed, with the watch ticking softly, slow reconnection began. Elena's guarded curiosity grew alongside lingering fear, her overwhelming trust reawakening as a passionate, burning attachment that surprised even her. Vincent's compassion, fierce and protective from the very first moment, deepened into a profound fatherly responsibility that clashed violently with his remorse. The rescue had brought them to safety. Medical care had begun the long process of healing the body, and small acts of kindness were slowly bridging the emotional chasm. Yet the full truth still waited in the shadows, and the inner storms, both his and hers, continued to build promising revelations that would test every fragile thread of reconnection, the wind carrying a sharper edge that reminded everyone winter was approaching. In the secure suburban safe house, Vincent Rossi had created a fragile sanctuary, yet the world outside refused to stay distant. His wealth continued to manifest with increasing intensity, private medical staff on call, warm rooms that banished every memory of freezing drafts, resources that erased debts and worries with quiet efficiency. But for Vincent, each comfort only sharpened the violent tearing in his heart. The overwhelming compassion he had felt for Elena Ramirez from the very first moment had evolved into a profound fatherly responsibility centered on Mia and Tommy. Consuming remorse gnawed relentlessly at him for the years of absolute poverty they had endured while he lived in insulated power. Gnawing guilt turned into violent emotional conflict during sleepless hours, leaving him torn between the man he had become and the protector he desperately wanted to be. One such inner storm peaked after another tense, unexpected street confrontation. Rivals had tested boundaries near one of his legitimate construction sites on the south side, voices rising in the gathering dusk, with veiled threats about territory and loyalty. Vincent diffused the situation with measured words and calm authority, preventing escalation. Yet the encounter left him drained and filled with fresh remorse. How easily could those same shadows reach the safe house? The fatherly bond he felt toward Mia, the little girl whose innocent kindness had begun healing his emotional wounds, made every risk feel unbearable. Drama escalated dramatically one stormy evening. A rival faction, sensing distraction in Vincent's world, launched a bold ambush at the edge of the property. Gunshots cracked in the distance, not close enough to shatter windows, but near enough to send fear rippling through the house. Vincent moved instinctively to shield Elena and the children, his powerful frame tense as he guided them to a safer interior room. In the heart-pounding chaos, Mia and Tommy acted with street-smart courage born from years of hardship. The 7-year-old girl and her loyal friend slipped through a side door, using their small size and knowledge of hiding spots to evade the intruders. They found an old phone in the garage and called for help using numbers Vincent had quietly taught them in case of emergency. Their quick thinking and bravery helped summon Vincent's trusted men, who arrived swiftly and ended the threat without further violence. When the danger passed, Vincent discovered Mia and Tommy tending to a graze on his arm with improvised bandages from the first aid kit, their small hands shaking but determined. The sight struck him with extreme psychological shock. These children, once thin, malnourished, and sleep-deprived from endless cold nights in their old room, had risked themselves to protect him. Tears burned in his eyes as fierce tenderness clashed violently with remorse. The father-child bond deepened to an almost painful intensity. Mia's gentle touch while wrapping the bandage carried the same healing kindness that had slowly been thawing his hardened heart. Tommy, still wary, met Vincent's gaze for the first time with a flicker of trust, whispering, "You protected us first." Elena watched the scene, her thin frame trembling from the residual fear. The ambush had triggered old memories of powerlessness, leaving her dizzy and numb, a wave of disorientation causing her to lose balance, until Vincent steadied her. Horror and anxiety washed over her, yet beneath it burned the passionate attachment that had taken root years earlier and was now rekindling with overwhelming force. "They are only children," she whispered in her soft, timid, polite voice, tears slipping down her cheeks. "They should not have to be so brave." In the quiet, condensed emotional stillness that followed the storm as the children finally slept safely, Vincent sat beside Elena. The inner tearing reached new violent depths. Remorse for his dangerous world consuming him, he felt the disparity between his power and their former misery, with brutal clarity nights of biting wind, humiliating hunger, absurdly unfair evictions, and shut-off utilities that had stripped Elena of dignity. Yet the children's kindness had physically and emotionally begun to heal him, their innocent acts, stitching together wounds he had carried since believing them lost. Unreasonable injustices from the past continued to echo cruelly. The next morning, a letter arrived from an old landlord demanding payment for fictional damages, a final absurd blow that triggered Elena's deepest inner torment. She read it with shaking hands, confusion and fear mixing with sharp pain in her head. The incident left her disoriented and numb, a wave of dizziness forcing her to sit as old humiliations flooded back the powerless nights when she had chosen between medicine and food, the sleep-deprived exhaustion of trying to shield Mia and Tommy from the cold. Vincent handled the matter quietly, with one call erasing the debt, but the event exposed the violent intensity of her emotions, fierce shame at having been so utterly vulnerable, anxiety that safety could still be snatched away. As days passed, the children's healing influence grew stronger. Mia continued bringing Vincent small gifts, a drawing of their new family, a question about whether he liked apples, each act melting another layer of his emotional armor. Tommy's distrust softened after the ambush. He began asking tentative questions, revealing deeper truths about the harsh lives of disadvantaged children. One afternoon, in a moment of condensed stillness, Tommy admitted, "I thought all powerful men were like the ones who hurt my mom, but you stayed when it was dangerous." The words struck Vincent with profound shock, intensifying the fatherly bond and the remorse for every child who had suffered as they once had. Elena's partial memories flickered more frequently, now triggered by emotionally charged moments. Sometimes Vincent's steady presence calmed her. Other times it unnerved her, stirring confusion and a fullness in her head that left her fearful and guarded. During one evening meal, when he helped steady her hand as dizziness struck again, she left her fingers resting longer than necessary. "Sometimes when you speak to Mia," she said softly, her voice timid and polite, "it feels like I have heard that tone before. In another life." The drama escalated further during a ferocious Chicago thunderstorm and citywide blackout one late October night. Rain hammered the roof like history, demanding entry, thunder shaking the windows. The children grew restless from being kept inside, the tension of recent events weighing on them. Mia, overstimulated by the storm and adult seriousness, snatched the silver pocket watch from the table despite warnings and bolted into the corridor. At first they thought she had gone to the safer interior room. Then the nurse checked. Then the guard checked. Panic arrived, total and consuming. Elena's face went white. "Mia," she cried, her voice breaking with raw motherhood. Horror and anxiety flooded her, dizziness and numbness making her sway as she tried to stand. Vincent was already moving into the rain, heart wild with the terror of losing the child who had become his emotional anchor. The search felt eternal, though it lasted only minutes. They found Mia under the awning of an old roadside chapel 2 streets away, sheltering with a kind stranger who had pulled her from the flooding street. She was soaked and shaking, but safe, the pocket watch clutched tightly in both hands. Elena reached her first, dropping to her knees and pulling the girl into a fierce embrace. "Do not leave me," she kept repeating softly, tears mixing with rain. "Do not leave me." Vincent knelt beside them under the awning, drenched and lungs burning, the possibility of loss hitting him with violent force. The fatherly love he felt for Mia, intense and protective from the moment he recognized the watch, surged with overwhelming power. The watch slipped from Mia's fingers to the wet ground and sprang open. Vincent picked it up, the engraving catching faint light. "For our time. V." Without planning, he spoke the old vow aloud. "No matter what happens, this time is ours." The words detonated inside Elena. She went still then, everything flooded back at once. The balcony conversations, the pregnancy, the promise, the crash, the years of not knowing why grief arrived without source. Shock and deep disorientation overwhelmed her. Dizziness, numbness, and sharp pain made her fold forward. Vincent caught her with one arm while Mia clung to the other side, frightened, but no longer lost. "Elena," he said softly. She stared at him, the lost years rising behind his face. "Vincent," she whispered the name, breaking from her with full recognition. Then the second sentence tore through her. "You buried me. Or thought you did." Tears came for both of them. Mia pressed herself between them, instinctively closing the distance adults create when grief becomes honest. The memory return was not gentle. It arrived as a flood, bringing back the love, the pregnancy, the betrayal, and every year of poverty that had followed. Elena knew him now, knew the child, knew the father's cruelty that had stolen their time. In the hospital the next morning after the storm had passed, Elena woke with a severe migraine that left her vomiting and crying while trying to braid Mia's hair. Memory had returned not as neat sequence, but as overwhelming torrent. She felt the violent intensity of her emotions, fierce anger at the lost years, confusion at the woman she had become in hardship, deep disorientation at suddenly holding the full weight of her own story. Yet beneath it all burned the passionate attachment that had ignited years ago and survived even amnesia. Vincent stayed by her side, the inner tearing reaching its most brutal peak. Remorse for his unwitting role in the events surrounding the accident consumed him, clashing violently with the fatherly responsibility he felt toward Mia and Tommy. His wealth allowed the best care, yet no amount of power could erase the years of cold nights, humiliating hunger, and powerless struggle Elena had endured. The children's kindness, especially Mia's innocent healing presence, had begun mending his emotional wounds, but the truth still waited to be fully confronted. In quiet moments of condensed emotional stillness as rain finally stopped, and the city breathed again, slow healing continued. Elena re-met Vincent as the changed woman she had become, stronger, more guarded, yet still carrying that quiet kindness that stood against any darkness. Vincent learned to wait outside the door of her confusion, offering protection without control. The life-threatening dangers and the children's bravery had accelerated both physical recovery and emotional reconnection. Memory had returned in a storm triggered by the watch and the old vow, but the real work of rebuilding was only beginning. The inner worlds of all of them, torn, numbed, and violently tested, now stood at the edge of greater truths and deeper healing, with a father's love for his child at the center of every fragile step forward. The storm had passed, but October in Chicago, 2025, still carried a lingering chill that seeped into the bones. In the quiet suburban safe house, the air felt heavier now that Elena Ramirez's memories had returned in their full, overwhelming flood. Vincent Rossi moved through the days with the same measured power that defined his empire: construction contracts signed in downtown offices, resources redirected with a single call. Yet his wealth only highlighted the cruel disparity that had once defined Elena's life. The comfortable rooms, the warm meals that required no rationing, the medical care that erased years of untreated suffering, stood in stark contrast to the absolute poverty she had endured, thin and malnourished, sleep-deprived from countless cold nights when the wind whistled through cracks and she chose between feeding Mia and Tommy or feeding herself. Those memories, now fully restored, tore at Elena with violent intensity, leaving her caught between gratitude and deep, confusing pain. Vincent's inner world had become a battlefield of escalating torment. The fatherly love he felt for Mia, the little girl whose innocent kindness had repeatedly healed his emotional wounds, burned with passionate intensity, but it clashed violently with consuming remorse and gnawing guilt. He now knew the devastating truth: he had unknowingly participated in the crew that carried out his father's orders the night of the accident, believing it was merely a rival shakedown. The revelation, pieced together through quiet investigators and old contacts, struck him with extreme psychological shock. How could the man who had vowed to protect Elena and her child have been part of the very machinery that nearly destroyed them? Violent emotional conflict raged inside him during every quiet moment, remorse so deep it left him numb, guilt that made his hands shake when he looked at Mia's trusting face. The disparity between his power and their former misery felt like a knife. His effortless ability to command safety against the humiliating nights Elena had spent, huddled with the children against freezing winds, powerless and desperate. Elena, now remembering everything, carried her own violent inner tearing. She knew the pregnancy, the promise of the pocket watch, the crash, and the long years of poverty that followed. At times she felt desperate and powerless all over again, her voice soft, timid, and polite when she spoke to Vincent, the older, powerful man whose world had both saved and betrayed her. I remember the road, she whispered one afternoon, confusion and fear mixing with sharp pain in her temples. Dizziness and numbness washed over her, causing loss of balance until she steadied herself against the wall. Horror at the betrayal and anxiety about the future left her disoriented, yet beneath it all burned the overwhelming trust and attachment that had taken root from the very first moment of kindness years ago. An intense, passionate warmth that refused to die even in the face of such pain. Unreasonable and unjust echoes from the past continued to strike with absurd cruelty, exposing the depth of her inner torment. A final notice arrived from an old clinic demanding payment for records that had been lost during her years of hardship. A humiliating reminder of times when she had begged for basic care while thin and exhausted. The letter triggered a wave of deep shame and violent emotional intensity. She felt the old powerlessness return. The nights when she had skipped meals so the children could eat the sleep-deprived exhaustion of trying to hold their small world together. Tears came quietly as she sat in the safe-house kitchen, the contrast with Vincent's wealth making the memory even more painful. Vincent handled the matter with one discreet call, erasing the debt, but the incident only deepened his remorse. He began confronting the full horror in private. One evening, after resolving another tense street confrontation, an unexpected encounter with rival faction members near a lakeside warehouse, where low voices exchanged firm challenges about loyalty and boundaries, he returned to the ferry's safe house drained. The standoff had been bold, the air thick with unspoken threats, yet he had diffused it with calm authority. Still, it reminded him of the dangerous world he inhabited, and the guilt it stirred made his decision clearer. In the study of his father's fortified home, the confrontation finally came. The old Don Rossi sat behind the heavy oak desk, his face carved with years of cold calculation. Vincent placed the copied reports and witness statements on the desk between them. "You lied to me," he said, voice low but steady. "You orchestrated everything. And I was part of the crew that night. I thought it was just another shakedown." The old Don did not deny it at first. He exhaled through his nose, irritation rather than guilt flicker out his features. "She would have destroyed your future. A woman with nothing carrying a child that threatened everything we built." Vincent felt the inner tearing explode into something almost unbearable. Violent conflict raged, remorse for his own unwitting role, fierce anger at his father's cruelty, and a profound fatherly love for Mia that made every word feel like a betrayal of the child he now claimed as his own. "She was carrying my daughter," he said, throat tight. "You nearly erased them both." The old Don leaned back, his voice cold. "I protected what was larger than your temporary feelings. Some complications must be removed." The sentence landed with devastating force. Vincent gripped the edge of the desk, knuckles whitening. In that moment, he saw clearly his father loved him in his own monstrous way. But that love justified any cruelty. Extreme psychological shock washed over Vincent, numbing him even as remorse and guilt tore violently at his heart. He left without another word, because staying would have forced actions that could never be taken back. The next weeks became a secret war fought beneath polished surfaces. Vincent did not expose his father immediately. Elena still needed time to integrate her memories, and Mia and Tommy required stability. Yet he used his resources quietly: investigators, old contacts, retired drivers who remembered too much. Each new piece of evidence deepened the gnawing remorse until it felt like it would consume him entirely. The father-child bond with Mia grew stronger in small, tender moments, reading bedtime stories, helping with homework, watching her laugh freely for the first time. Tommy's trust also deepened, the boy now sharing stories of his own harsh life, revealing truths about disadvantaged children that moved Vincent to quiet tears in private. Elena and Vincent rebuilt slowly, not as they had once been, but as the changed people they had become. She remained at times guarded and fearful, her voice soft and polite, yet the overwhelming attachment burned brighter. One evening after another absurdly unfair letter arrived, this time from an old neighbor claiming unpaid debts from years ago. Elena sat by the window, dizziness and pain making her sway. "I remember every cold night," she said softly. "Every time I chose between feeding the children and feeding myself. The humiliation of it, the powerlessness." Vincent knelt beside her, the violent inner conflict reaching new depths. His wealth could erase those debts instantly, yet no amount of power could give back the years of suffering. "I am sorry," he whispered, remorse tearing at him. "For everything my world touched." She looked at him sharply, though her eyes were wet. "Do not apologize for whether you did not make, but if you ever stop watching yourself carefully, you could become like him, in kinder clothes." The words struck Vincent like a physical blow, extreme psychological shock mixed with profound determination. He would not become his father. The children's kindness, especially Mia's innocent healing presence, had already begun changing him, pulling him away from the darkest parts of his empire. In quiet, condensed moments of emotional stillness, the family began to feel real. Mia asked directly one afternoon, "Are you my father?" Neither adult escaped the question. Vincent knelt, meeting her eyes. "Yes," he said the word, carrying the weight of all the lost time. "And I was not where I should have been. But I am here now." Mia studied him for a long moment, then simply said, "Okay, then do not go away." That simple trust nearly broke him again. The father-child bond centered on Mia's gentle healing influence had become the core of his redemption. Tommy, too, found his place, his earlier distrust transforming into loyal attachment after witnessing Vincent's consistent protection. Vincent began redirecting his power toward humanity. He quietly funded free clinics and safe programs for single mothers and at-risk children. In Chicago's poorest neighborhoods, motivated by the memory of Elena's suffering and the children's resilience, his wealth, once used only to maintain balance, now served something larger. Yet the confrontation with his father was not over. Another tense street encounter arose when the old Don's remaining loyalists tested Vincent's resolve near a downtown construction site. Words were exchanged in low, firm tones, challenges about family loyalty and legacy. Vincent stood firm, diffusing the tension with calm authority, but the incident escalated the drama, reminding everyone that choosing humanity over power carried real cost. In the quiet that followed, Elena took Vincent's hand. "They stole our years," she said softly. "They do not get the rest." Vincent looked at her, then at Mia and Tommy playing safely nearby. The inner tearing remained. Intense remorse and guilt still gnawed, but the passionate attachment and fatherly love had grown stronger than the pain. He was choosing a different path: protection, compassion, and the slow healing of wounds through the innocent kindness of a child who had already saved him more than once. The truth had been confronted, and in that confrontation, Vincent began turning away from the shadows of power toward the light of humanity. The family, though still healing, stood together, Elena's quiet strength, the children's pure hearts, and Vincent's hard-won redemption against whatever storms might still come. October lingered in Chicago, 2025, with skies that had cleared after the storm but still carried the sharp memory of rain and wind. In the safe house, the days settled into a careful rhythm of healing, yet the air remained thick with unspoken weight. Vincent Rossi continued to wield his power with quiet precision: construction contracts secured in gleaming downtown offices. Resources moved with effortless authority, yet his wealth now served a different purpose. The comfortable rooms, the abundant meals, the medical care that erased years of neglect stood in painful contrast to the absolute poverty Elena Ramirez had endured for so long, painfully thin and malnourished, sleep-deprived from endless, cold nights when the wind howled through cracks and she chose between feeding Mia and Tommy or herself. Those memories, fully restored, haunted her with increasing intensity, exposing the humiliating depth of her former powerlessness. Vincent's inner tearing had grown even more brutal in the days following the confrontation with his father. Consuming remorse clawed at him without mercy. The knowledge that he had unknowingly taken part in the events that nearly erased Elena and Mia tore violently at his heart. Gnawing guilt mixed with fierce fatherly love for Mia, creating emotional conflict so violent it left him numb during quiet moments. The passionate attachment he had felt toward Elena from the very first moment had transformed into a profound responsibility, centered on protecting the family that had begun to form around him. Every time he looked at Mia's bright eyes or Tommy's cautious smile, the remorse deepened. How could a powerful man who commanded such resources have allowed such suffering to continue? The disparity felt cruel and unrelenting. Elena moved through the days with a mixture of fragile strength and lingering turmoil. She was still recovering physically thin frame, slowly gaining strength, headaches coming less often, but emotionally she remained caught between overwhelming trust and deep confusion. At times she felt the old desperation and powerlessness return, her voice soft, timid, and polite. When she spoke to Vincent, the older man whose world had both saved and betrayed her. "I remember the cold nights," she whispered one morning, dizziness washing over her as she stood too quickly, causing numbness and loss of balance. "The way I would hold the children close so the wind would not reach them. The shame of it. The helplessness." Vincent steadied her gently, his own heart tearing with violent intensity. Extreme psychological shock struck him again as he imagined those nights, Elena thin and exhausted, choosing hunger so the children could eat, enduring humiliations that no one should bear. His wealth could erase debts and provide safety in an instant, yet it could never give back the years stolen. The father-child bond with Mia had become his anchor. Her innocent kindness continued to heal his emotional wounds. pulling him toward redemption even as remorse threatened to drown him. Unreasonable and unjust situations from the past continued to surface with absurd cruelty, exposing Elena's inner torment. A final collection notice arrived from an old landlord, claiming unpaid damages that had never existed, a humiliating reminder of times when she had begged for basic mercy while sleep-deprived and desperate. The letter triggered a wave of deep shame and anxiety, leaving her confused and fearful pain flaring in her head until she had to sit down. Vincent resolved the matter quietly with one call, but the incident ripped open fresh emotional wounds for both of them. Elena feeling the violent intensity of her past powerlessness. Vincent feeling fresh remorse for the world that had allowed such suffering. Amid the healing, Vincent began to expose the truth in careful, calculated ways. He did not rush into public scandal. Instead, he used his influence quietly leaking selected documents through trusted channels, speaking with board members and old associates who valued stability over blind loyalty. The scandal began to spread in whispers at first. Then, in more open conversations, a powerful family figure had tried to erase an inconvenient life to protect legacy. Shareholders disliked the instability it threatened. Church elders and community leaders pulled away. The old Don's grip on power weakened as age and visibility limited his ability to silence questions. One afternoon, after resolving another tense street confrontation, an unexpected encounter with lingering loyalists to his father near a Southside construction site, where low voices exchanged firm challenges about family duty and respect, Vincent returned to the safe house with fresh resolve. The standoff had been bold, the tension thick in the autumn air, yet he had diffused it with calm authority. The incident reminded him of the cost of his choices, intensifying the violent conflict inside him. He would not allow the shadows of the past to touch Mia and Tommy again. In the quiet, condensed emotional stillness of the living room that evening, the family gathered. Mia sat close to Vincent, leaning against his arm with the easy trust of a child who had begun to believe in safety. Tommy, no longer hiding, asked questions about the world with growing curiosity. Elena watched them, her face softer now, though still carrying the weight of memory. "They stole 7 years," she said softly, her voice timid yet steady. "But I will not let them steal any more." Vincent felt the words strike deep. The fatherly love he felt for Mia surged with passionate intensity, clashing violently with the remorse that still gnawed at him. In that moment of stillness, he made a silent vow he would turn his power toward healing rather than control. He began restructuring parts of his legitimate empire, redirecting funds toward free clinics and protection programs for single mothers and at-risk children in Chicago's poorest neighborhoods. The initiatives were done quietly at first, but Elena encouraged him to attach his name. "If it matters enough to build," she told him one evening, "it matters enough to let people ask why." The children thrived in the new stability. Mia's laughter filled the rooms more freely, her drawings, now including all 4 of them as a family. Tommy's distrust had softened into loyal attachment. He no longer warned Mia against Vincent, but instead asked him for help fixing small things around the house. Their innocent kindness continued to heal Vincent's emotional wounds in profound ways. Small acts like Mia sharing her favorite story, or Tommy offering a shy hug after a difficult day, pulled him further from the darkness of his past. Yet drama escalated again when the old Don made one final attempt to reassert control. Loyalists arranged a bold but contained confrontation near one of Vincent's downtown properties, words exchanged in measured tones about legacy and betrayal. Vincent stood firm, his authority unshaken, diffusing the tension without escalation. The incident left him drained, but more determined, the violent inner conflict reaching new depths as he realized the full cost of choosing humanity. Remorse for his own past actions mixed with fierce protectiveness for the family he was building. In the quiet that followed, Elena took his hand. "You are not him," she said softly. "You are choosing differently." Vincent looked at her, then at Mia and Tommy playing safely nearby. The disparity between his wealth and Elena's former life nights of cold wind, humiliating hunger, desperate powerlessness, still struck him with painful clarity. Yet the overwhelming attachment he felt, the fatherly bond that had grown through Mia's healing presence, had become stronger than the guilt. He was learning that correction offered by those he loved was not humiliation but maintenance. The rebuilding continued through patience and small daily acts. Elena re-met Vincent as the woman she had become, stronger, more cautious, yet still carrying the quiet kindness that had always defined her. Vincent learned to wait outside the doors of her confusion, offering protection without possession. The pocket watch remained a treasured object, opened on quiet evenings to read the engraving aloud. Its scratches a reminder of survival rather than loss. Exposure of the old Don's actions continued to spread, forcing him to step back from public life for health reasons. Vincent did not seek revenge in the traditional sense. Instead, he focused on initial redemption, using his resources to support programs that would prevent other families from enduring what Elena and the children had suffered. The father-child bond with Mia had become the emotional core of his transformation. Her innocent heart had healed wounds he had carried for years, teaching him compassion over control. In moments of condensed emotional stillness, as the October light softened through the windows, Vincent sat with his growing family. The inner tearing remained intense remorse and guilt, still present, but the passionate love and responsibility he felt had begun to outweigh the pain. Elena's trust, once guarded, now burned with quiet intensity. Mia and Tommy's healing presence had shown him a different way to wield power. The family was rebuilding, not in the image of what was lost, but in the shape of what could still be claimed. Exposure had begun redemption, was taking its first steps, and the truth, painful as it was, had opened the door to a future where stolen years would not define the rest. October in Chicago, 2025, drew toward its final days with skies that had cleared but left behind a persistent chill that seemed to seep into every corner of the safe house. Vincent Rossi's wealth surrounded the family with increasing intensity, thick blankets that held warmth through the night, meals that required no careful counting, medical care that addressed every lingering ache from years of clanks. Hardship. Yet for Vincent, every comfort only sharpened the violent tearing in his heart. The fatherly love he felt for Mia had become the center of his world, a passionate protective bond that had grown through her innocent kindness and brave acts. Consuming remorse and gnawing guilt still clawed at him relentlessly, especially now that he knew he had unknowingly participated in the crew that carried out his father's orders the night of the accident. The inner conflict raged with brutal intensity. How could the powerful man who could command safety and resources have been part of the machinery that nearly erased the child who now healed him? Elena Ramirez moved through the days with fragile strength, her body slowly recovering from years of malnutrition and exhaustion. She was still thin, the marks of long nights of cold wind and skipped meals visible in her hollow cheeks and careful movements. At times, the old desperation and powerlessness returned, leaving her voice soft, timid, and polite when she spoke to Vincent. "I remember choosing between medicine and food," she whispered one afternoon, dizziness washing over her as she stood, causing numbness and loss of balance. Confusion and fear flickered across her face, followed by deep disorientation that made her head ache with sharp pain. The restored memories brought violent emotional intensity, horror at the betrayal, anxiety about the fragility of their new safety, and an overwhelming attachment that burned passionately despite everything. Unreasonable and unjust echoes from the past continued to surface with absurd cruelty. A final notice arrived from an old assistant's office, claiming overpayment from years ago, demanding repayment Elena could never have afforded at the time. The letter triggered a wave of humiliating shame, leaving her numb and tearful as she recalled nights when she had held Mia and Tommy close, against the freezing wind, powerless and desperate. Vincent resolved the matter quietly, but the incident ripped open fresh torment for Elena and deepened Vincent's remorse. Drama escalated dramatically one tense evening. A dying rival informant cornered in a shadowed warehouse during one of Vincent's discreet investigations revealed a shocking new truth in a halting confession. The old Don had not only ordered the hit, but had secretly arranged for Mia to be taken at birth and placed into the foster system as leverage, a hidden insurance policy against any future weakness in Vincent. Tommy, it turned out, had never been simply Mia's best friend by chance. He had been planted nearby by the Don's crew to watch and report, though the two children had genuinely bonded through shared hardship and protected each other on the streets. The revelation landed with extreme psychological shock. Vincent felt the room tilt, violent inner conflict exploding inside him. Remorse so deep it numbed him, guilt that tore at his chest like a physical wound. The fatherly love he felt for Mia clashed violently with the horror of how close his own world had come to destroying her from the very beginning. Elena listened in stunned silence, her thin frame trembling. Horror and anxiety flooded her, dizziness and numbness making her sway until Vincent caught her. "They tried to take her from me before she even took her first breath," she whispered, her voice soft and breaking. The mindset of someone who had once been desperately poor and suddenly protected by a powerful man hit her with full force, overwhelming trust mixed with deep fear that safety could still be an illusion. The new truth brought fresh waves of unreasonable injustice. In the days that followed, the old Don, sensing his empire crumbling, launched one final desperate attempt to erase the evidence. Loyalists arranged a bold confrontation that escalated into an ambush near the safe house perimeter. Gunshots echoed in the distance as rivals moved in under cover of dusk. Vincent rushed to shield the family, his powerful frame tense with protective fury. In the heart-pounding chaos, Mia and Tommy once again showed their street-smart courage. The The little girl and her loyal friend used their small size to hide Vincent when he was grazed by a bullet, tending his wound with quick shaking hands while Tommy slipped away to call for help using a hidden phone. Their bravery saved him again, but in the frantic moments that followed, Mia stepped forward to shield Vincent from a second threat. A shot rang out. Mia crumpled to the ground, a wound to her side blooming red against her small frame. The world seemed to stop for Vincent. Extreme psychological shock flooded him, a numbness so complete it felt like the air had been pulled from his lungs. He dropped to his knees, gathering his bleeding daughter into his arms, while sirens wailed in the distance. Mia. The fatherly love he felt for her, intense and all-consuming, surged with violent force, clashing with terror and remorse so deep it threatened to break him entirely. The child who had carried the watch into his shop, the little girl whose innocent kindness had healed his emotional wounds night after night, now lay wounded because of the world he had brought with him. Elena reached them moments later, her face white with horror. She dropped beside them, pulling Mia close, while tears streamed down her cheeks. "Do not leave us," she whispered, her voice soft and trembling with raw motherhood. Confusion and fear mixed with overwhelming attachment, dizziness making her sway as the reality of nearly losing her daughter tore violently at her inner world. Tommy stood nearby, shaking his earlier distrust, long gone replaced by fierce loyalty and tearful worry. In the ambulance and later at the hospital, Vincent stayed by Mia's bedside without leaving. The inner tearing reached its most brutal peak. Consuming remorse flooded every second, guilt for his unwitting role years ago. Guilt for the danger his life had brought. Even now, guilt for every cold night Elena and the children had endured while he lived in insulated power. The disparity felt unbearable. His wealth could command the best surgeons and private rooms, yet it could not turn back time, or protect Mia from the bullet meant for him. Violent emotional conflict raged inside him, power demanding he retaliate compassion, and fatherly love demanding he choose a different path. In the condensed emotional stillness of the hospital room, holding Mia's small hand while machines beeped softly, Vincent broke down completely. The passionate attachment that had burned since the first moment he saw Elena now centered entirely on the child who had become his heart. Elena sat on the other side of the bed, her thin fingers intertwined with Vincent's. She felt the old powerlessness return in waves, horror at how close they had come to loss, anxiety that their fragile safety could still shatter, deep disorientation as memories of her own near death mixed with the present terror. Yet her kindness endured, offering soft, polite words of comfort even as tears fell. "She saved you," she whispered, "just as she has been saving all of us." Tommy, exhausted but loyal, curled up in a chair nearby, his presence a quiet reminder of the bond the two children had forged in hardship. His earlier warnings had long transformed into trust, and now he watched Vincent with eyes that held both fear and hope. The hours stretched into a long night of waiting. Vincent whispered promises to Mia as she fought for life stories of the future, vows of protection, quiet admissions of love he had never spoken aloud. The father-child bond, already profound, deepened into something unbreakable in those terrible hours. Mia's innocent heart had healed his emotional wounds repeatedly. Now, in her moment of greatest vulnerability, she became the catalyst for his final breaking and rebuilding. When Mia finally woke the next morning, weak but alive, she looked up at Vincent with tired eyes and whispered the word that shattered him completely: "Daddy." Vincent's tears came freely. The extreme psychological shock of nearly losing her, combined with the blood revelation and the weight of all the stolen years, left him raw and transformed. In that single moment, the violent inner conflict resolved into clarity. He would fully accept Mia and Tommy as chosen family as his own. No more hiding behind empire or shadows. He would protect and raise them openly, stepping back from the darkest parts of his world. Elena watched the scene with tears in her eyes, her overwhelming attachment burning brighter than ever. The mindset of someone who had once been desperately poor and suddenly protected by a powerful man had evolved into something deeper, a shared family forged through pain, kindness, and unbreakable love. The shocking twists had nearly destroyed them, but instead they had forged an even stronger bond. The near loss of Mia, the blood revelation about Tommy, and the raw terror of that night had pushed Vincent to the edge. Now in the hospital room, bathed in soft morning light, the family stood at the threshold of true redemption. The inner tearing remained, but it had begun to give way to something larger: a father's complete acceptance, a mother's enduring kindness, and two children whose innocent hearts had healed what power had tried to break. The rest of their time would not be stolen. The final days of October in Chicago 2025 brought a softer light that filtered through the hospital windows, casting gentle warmth over the room where Mia lay recovering. Vincent Rossi sat beside her bed, his powerful frame bent with exhaustion, yet filled with a quiet strength that had been forged in the fire of recent events. His wealth surrounded them with increasing intensity. private nurses, the best medical equipment, and resources that ensured no expense was spared. Yet none of it could erase the memory of Mia's small body shielding him from harm. The fatherly love he felt for her had become the beating heart of his existence, a passionate and protective bond that burned from the very first moment he recognized the silver pocket watch, and only grew fiercer through every trial. Elena Ramirez stood on the other side of the bed, her thin frame still bearing faint traces of the years of absolute poverty she had endured. Malnourished and sleep-deprived from countless cold nights when the wind cut through their day, cramped room like a knife, forcing her to choose between feeding her children and feeding herself. Those humiliating nights of powerlessness when she huddled with Mia and Tommy under thin blankets, while hunger gnawed and exhaustion pressed down, remained vivid in her restored memory. At times the old desperation returned, leaving her voice soft, timid, and polite when she spoke to Vincent. Yet the overwhelming attachment she felt intense and burning from their first quiet conversations years ago had transformed into a deep shared compassion that transcended every barrier of wealth and poverty. In the condensed emotional stillness of the hospital room, Vincent held Mia's small hand as she woke fully for the first time since the shooting. Her weak voice carried the innocence that had healed him repeatedly. "Daddy," she whispered again, and the word struck Vincent with extreme psychological shock. Violent inner conflict tore through him, consuming remorse for the blood revelation about Tommy's planted role and his own unwitting part in the past, gnawing guilt that his world had nearly cost Mia her life, and a fierce fatherly love so profound it left him trembling. The mindset of someone who had once been desperately poor and suddenly protected by a wealthy and powerful man was reflected in Elena's tear-filled eyes as she watched the scene, her own inner world still numb from the terror of nearly losing her daughter. Tommy sat nearby, his earlier distrust long replaced by loyal attachment. The vulnerable boy who had known the harsh realities of the foster system now found safety in this unexpected family. His presence added quiet depth, reminding everyone that compassion could bridge even the deepest divides regardless of skin color or background, wealth and poverty, could not separate true love when hearts chose humanity. Vincent's inner tearing reached its most intense peak in those hours. Remorse and guilt clashed violently with the overwhelming surge of responsibility he felt toward Mia and Tommy. He whispered promises to his daughter, vows to protect and raise her openly, to step back from the darkest corners of his empire, and to use his power only for good. The near loss had clarified everything. In a moment of profound stillness, he fully accepted both children as his own. Mia was his blood, his heart. Tommy was his chosen son, bonded through shared trials and innocent kindness. This father-child resolution brought tears to everyone present, a powerful reminder that love once awakened could heal even the deepest wounds. As Mia grew stronger over the following days, Vincent began the work of true redemption. He publicly renounced the most dangerous elements of his old life, restructuring his legitimate construction empire into community-focused projects that built safe housing and support programs for families in need. The initiatives carried his name not for pride, but as a testament to the lesson that true strength lies in lifting others. Elena encouraged this path, her quiet kindness standing as a constant light against any remaining shadows of cruelty. One final tense street confrontation arose when lingering loyalists to the old Dawn attempted to challenge Vincent near a lakeside development site. Words were exchanged in measured tones under the autumn sun, challenges about legacy and loyalty that carried weight but never escalated into violence. Vincent stood firm with calm authority, diffusing the tension and walking away with his head held high. The encounter served as the last echo of his past, reinforcing his choice to prioritize family and compassion over power. In the quiet, condensed emotional stillness that followed on the terrace of their new home overlooking Lake Michigan, the family gathered as October drew to a close. Elena held the silver pocket watch, its scratches, a testament to survival. She looked at Vincent with eyes full of the overwhelming attachment that had survived years of separation and pain. "They stole 7 years," she said softly. "They do not get the rest." Vincent nodded, his gaze resting on Mia and Tommy playing nearby. The inner torment had not vanished entirely. Remorse still lingered, but it had been transformed by the powerful father-child bond that now defined him. Mia's innocent heart had delivered the greatest lesson of all, that knowledge comes through compassion, and every lesson in life teaches us that education in kindness creates stronger bonds than any empire. Through this knowledge, we learn the true value of family, and the education of the heart shows that love knows no boundaries of skin color or circumstance. Another lesson emerges when we embrace knowledge of our past mistakes, turning them into opportunities for growth and understanding. The education we gain from hardship reveals that wealth and poverty cannot separate genuine compassion when hearts choose humanity. Finally, this knowledge reminds us that every lesson in forgiveness and every education in empathy builds a legacy richer than power alone. The family's story had become one of reclaimed time and profound healing. Vincent had stepped fully into fatherhood, raising Mia and Tommy with open arms and a commitment to a more humane path. Elena's enduring kindness continued to guide them, proving that love, regardless of skin color, could bridge any divide created by wealth or poverty. The children thrived their innocent spirits, teaching daily lessons in resilience and joy. As the sun set over the lake, casting golden light across the water, the family stood together in quiet unity. This journey had shown that true redemption comes not from revenge, but from choosing compassion every single day. We hope this story touched your heart and reminded you of the power of family forgiveness and second chances. We wish everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and daily peace. If this tale moved you, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share it with others so you can enjoy many engaging videos every day. Tell us in the comments how you feel about this story and how it connects to real life. We invite you to share your thoughts so the creator can listen to the emotions from deep within the viewers' hearts. Goodbye for now, and we promise to see you again in the next video. Disclaimer: all stories on this channel are fictional and created solely for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to real people, events, or places is purely coincidental.